All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. Hi, my name is Sunny Sassaman, and I am happy to be here with you today. I am a mediator. My profession is in communication and conflict management. My background has been in business, so I've worked a lot with workplaces, but where I really get excited is working with small businesses. And I'm here today to talk to you about being successful in your partnerships and really just in your business. I came to be here today because it was about a year and a half ago. I was attending some of the cannabis conferences and meetings and events, and I was actually approached by an attorney and a consultant to the industry, and they both said, "You need to be in this industry. We need you." And life happens, and we fast forward, and here I am today. So probably didn't realize, but it was a little bit of patience to get me here today. So my hope today is I don't know where you're at with your career, with your business. So if you are thinking about starting a business with a partner, or maybe you already are in the business with a partner, or maybe you're just having some issues that are of the interpersonal nature and you're not sure what to do. My hope is that when you leave here today, you'll have some tools that you can use to help you have those conversations that are really important, but can also be really difficult to have. At the end, I will have time for questions, so ask if you could hold your questions until that time, and then I'm saving a chunk of time at the end, so we make sure we can do that, okay? So you're here because you have an idea. I'm going to assume that. You have an idea, you have a vision. And if you're looking at doing a partnership, there's you, and then there's your partner. You both have some ideas, a vision of what it is that you want to be doing. Partnerships come together for different reasons, right? But not necessarily always for the right ideas or for the right reasons, but we don't realize that at the beginning. Anybody here married? Right? You know what I'm talking about, right? It's challenging. It's something that you have to work at. But it's not something we need to be afraid of. So think about, if you are looking at a partnership, think about what it is that brought you together. And maybe you're still in those early stages, right? Where it's kind of still that honeymoon, the excitement. And there's things that'll come up that maybe will notch you a little bit, but you're like, no, this is a great idea. We're going to do this, right? And you just keep moving forward. And that's okay, because that's normal. That is what happens. How else do we come up with our great ideas and create these wonderful businesses? We have to keep pushing forward. So there you are, you and your partner. You've decided you're going to form a business together. And you're sitting there nicely, working together, keeping that excitement, that enthusiasm. But wait a minute. Those investors, they're hovering. They're also one of your partners. You've got employees you have to manage. And apparently, your partner has a different employee management style than you. Who knew? And then there's your family. You got into business probably, right? Your self-employment, so you could have time, have a flexible schedule, have control. But yet, is there another birthday that you're missing? Are you being pulled in different directions and not feeling supported about what it is that you want to do with your life, with your family? And of course, then there's the OLCC, right? And the rules. And then, of course, customers, vendors, all competing for your vision, for your time, putting pressure on you and your partner or partners, and making it really difficult to communicate, to manage your business, and to problem solve in a way that's effective. And you start to feel like you're just in this vortex. And you feel like you're in a vortex and like, how am I going to get out of this? Does anybody relate to that? Yeah, it's kind of a scary place to be. So take a moment and breathe. Just take a moment. We forget to exhale. I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I'm driving around and all of a sudden I'll just go, I'm like, oh, that felt good. So remember to breathe. And there's actually, it's said if you breathe in for twice as long if you exhale is twice as long as you inhale. So inhale for 1, exhale for 2, and do that 3 times. If you're feeling like this, it will reset your brain. So practice that breathing. It's going to be very effective, and it's free and it's simple. All right. So forming a business partnership does have many advantages, though. So here are some of the top advantages of partnerships. One, again, is the pooling of complementary skills. So again, it's those things that we admired about our partner. We thought that'd be a great skill to have. I'm a creative, free spirit, and my partner's really analytical, right? Someone needs to do the books or stay on the numbers. Someone needs to go out there and work with employees and problem solve and work with the vendors or schmooze, whoever the vendors or whomever you're working with. And you also have to think about who are your partners when you're forming that business. Who are people who think that they are partners? You can also share in those startup costs, and that's where those other partners will come in. And certainly can share the risk with another. The thought being that by having a partner, instead of it all being on yourself as a sole proprietor, you can share that with somebody else. Makes sense, right? It seems like it's a good plan. Sorry. However, statistics show, and I actually just saw on an Intuit commercial, because it's tax time, right? So the Intuit commercial, maybe you saw this. The statistic for small business, so I'm thinking this is a single proprietor, is within 5 years, 50% will fail. If for partnerships, 70% will fail within 3 to 5 years. And that's a really high statistic. Causes of the failure, though? Well, business partnerships and love and friendship do not always mix well. I've talked to several folks already who are talking about friends that got together to form a business. When I was working with a mother-daughter several years ago, I actually started doing this in Hawaii. And they had this successful creative business that they used to take these little things that they created, these little like aloha shirts. They've been doing it for years and were well known as mother and daughter. But one of them needs had changed, and their emphasis was no longer so much on that business. So you got mother-daughter, but now you've got Thanksgiving being impacted, and holidays, and kids' birthdays, because they were no longer getting along. And there was a lot of misperception about what was going on and reasons for things. And when I was working with them, they ended up coming up with an agreement to dissolve the business partnership. But in a way that didn't end it, but just helped them grow to the next chapter. But it was no longer going to function the way they used to do it. So family can be a very complicated business partnership, as well as can with friends. Friends don't always make the best partners. I see some people taking pictures. It should be uploaded to also to the website, the slideshow. And if you came in late, there are some handouts at the back, but that's also available on the website or the app. Unequal commitment among the partners. Sometimes there's a perception of what it's not equal, but it's equitable. So both partners aren't equally invested or committed to the partnership. People have different values. Different values our values tend to get formed when we're younger, so we see time differently. We see our priorities differently. I mean, think about things that you value that make you different than, say, other businesses out there in the way that they conduct their business. And then you combine that with a partner. So our values can lead us to that statistic. And of course, personality clashes. apparently not everybody has the same personality as me, and not everyone appreciates mine sometimes. And I was once in a partnership. I've been a sole proprietor LLC or a single member LLC for most of my business career, almost about 20 years, but I have been in a partnership. And it was one of the most difficult things to do, and we were both mediators. Go figure. And then, of course, a lack of trust. We've got to trust those that we're doing business, or that we're exposing ourselves to. So those are primary reasons for failure. So part of the success in life, but certainly in business, is the ability to navigate those obstacles that will inevitably be placed in our way. And I don't know if you can read the quote at the bottom, but it says, if you find a path with no obstacles, it probably doesn't lead anywhere. So obstacles are normal. And hopefully one of the things you take away from this today is that the challenges of business, the communication challenges, the interpersonal relationships that we have to try and navigate, it's normal. I mean, it happens to everybody. But how we respond is what's going to make us different. So what obstacles have you experienced? Or challenges have you already had in front of you? Can you think of some as you're going through this process?
Partnership?
Yeah, if it's partnership.
Well, right now I'm trying to decide whether or not to bring in a friend who is also my next door neighbor.
Okay.
As a partner. She has very similar skill set to mine, but she also has the analytical side that I don't necessarily have.
Okay.
And so as I move forward in this process, I'm trying to decide where to go with that. And I'm leaning towards not, but I think that might hurt her feelings. And
So friend and neighbor that she is thinking about bringing into the partnership, who has both some similar skills but also complementary skills like analytical skills. And as you're going through this, you're kind of leaning against not doing it. So it is something definitely process of that. So it sounds like you started thinking about this, whether or not this is a good idea. Because a broken partnership and then having to avoid each other every time you go in and out the mailbox, yeah. It could be very awkward. Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. And that's a very real situation, though. But we'll see something in somebody else, and we think, okay, that's what I need. But again, it might be exactly what drives you nuts later on. And the assumptions that we make about other people, well, they're doing the same thing about you. So we have to get out of our heads and have those conversations so we know exactly what our expectations are for ourselves, for the business, and for others. So how do we get back to that idea, untangle all that chaos, and get back to that idea that brought us together in the first place? Because they say that statistic of 70% of the business partnerships, they say it's the interpersonal conflicts that destroy the business. It's not that the business wasn't a good idea or it doesn't have the legs to stand on its own. It's just the people running it are getting in the way. And one of my very first jobs so this is going way back, was working for a family friend who had formed an art gallery, a custom frame shop with a friend. And I worked there for about 6 years. And the original two owners, one of them decided it wasn't working and they were having a personality clash. But they wisely were able to separate and at that time, of course, do not know what their agreement was, but that business continued on for about 20 years after they separated. But had they not gone into it with some kind of plan for one of the members leaving, they would have had to close the doors. So it's one of my earliest experiences with a business partnership. And I was had vested interest because I was an employee. I was counting on that job. So the impact of conflict between partners, and if the business does not move forward, it impacts investors, vendors, employees, and families. I mean, just think as it trickles down.
So can I ask a real quick question? I caught in your statements that they had a plan to get out. So would you recommend planning on an exit strategy
Well, hold that question. So the question, yes, you're jumping ahead. Yeah, so of having a plan for an exit strategy, yes.
Okay.
And again, I don't know what theirs was, but they had to have had something. I don't think it was just by luck. So the idea is to have a plan for success. So in my experience of having done, I've probably worked formally through this business partnership blueprint with about, like through the whole process with about 6 different businesses, and they were at different points in their business life. Some were just starting, some were kind of mid-range, some were making some changes. And I've worked with different components of this as well. But from my experience, the first 3 up there are the top reasons why partnerships are successful. The first one being communication. The ability to communicate and have those difficult conversations that need to happen. And so it's actually some way, whether it's talking or it's through email or it's some kind of process where communication information is being shared and it's safe to come to the other person when you might be disagreeing. The second one is conflict management. Conflict's going to happen. It's inevitable. I mean, particularly in this industry, there's so much change. It's always happening. And you're having to navigate that as well as the different personalities of the people you're working with as well. So the ability to understand who you are in conflict as well as who your partner is in conflict and what your plan is for when you do have conflict that comes up. Because it's not conflict resolution, it's conflict management. And the third is the ability to navigate change. When people think of change, it's just like, a lot of times people just freeze. Because change means now I might have to do something differently. And our people tend to be resistant to that. Think about other places that you have worked. I mean, there's a reason why you're here today. You're looking for what you want to do in your life, I'm assuming. But there's something that motivated you to be here today. And when we work for others, I mean, if there's any federal employees in here, for example, you're not, people not getting paid. You want to have control over that. But sometimes, again, that has to do with change in order to make that happen. And then according to Forbes, and I would put trust kind of under communication, but I think it's an important part of, oops, not touching, oh, there it goes. Oh, sorry. How do I go back to it? Important part of the success is the ability to trust yourself, but also your partner, and be able to be honest with each other and with yourself. But trust is a very important component. If you don't have trust, it's going to be really hard to know that if you're making those decisions, the right decisions, if you can count on the other person. And then, of course, there it is again, complementary skills. So the Interpersonal Business Partnership Blueprint, I wrestled around with the name for this, but I like the idea of a blueprint because it can move. It's an idea of what your plan is. But if you've ever built a house or been an architect, you're working with a blueprint, you're not necessarily putting the color of the wall on your blueprint. And you can change the color of the wall or how you're going to arrange furniture. So a blueprint is the idea that you're going to have this agreement of how you're going to work together in your business. And by putting together this blueprint, you will have that plan. So the components of this, starting with fix this, hold on a second. All right, so the first part of it is making a commitment to creating an interpersonal business partnership blueprint. And that, if you look in your handout that I made available, it talks about the different components of what that might look like. And it's sitting down together and committing to developing this process. And if you are working with, you can do this on your own, but if you're working with a mediator can help you draft up a commitment to how, what your time frame might be and how you're going to navigate the process. I worked with these two doctors several years ago who had a very successful practice and were thinking about bringing on a third person to their practice and expanding. Well, the two doctors were good friends, had met in college, they lived together. The third person they were thinking about bringing on was also lived with them and was the girlfriend of one of the doctors. And what they found is that when they would go home every day, they would continue to just talk shop, talk business. They never stopped. So at our commitment meeting, what they left with, in addition to committing to this process, was a set of kind of ground rules that they put on the refrigerator at home. And the first one was that they would only talk shop until dinner, and then there was no more shop talking. And they had some other things on there, but it helped to bring some balance and help preserve their friendship as well. So there's an example of friends where it did work out. And they went through their whole process, the whole formal process, and expanded. The two did get married, and I think they brought in a fourth person even to the business. But they committed the time to going through this process and even start the very basic of how they were to conduct themselves when they were not at work. So the commitment can look like whatever it is you want it to look like as well. The second part is the expectation of self and others. And very basically, what do I think my job description is? What do I think your job description is? What do you think mine is, and vice versa? So sharing that information. I'm not really a morning person, so if you expect me to show up at 7 in the morning or 8 or 9, we're going to have a problem. But also, if I assume you're going to show up and be the morning person, we might have a problem too if you're not. So what are your expectations for yourself, for others? Again, we talked about management style of staff, who's going to communicate with the vendors, or who's going to keep track of all of our documents and all the things we need to do, who's going to take care of maintenance. So it's really getting it down to what we think we're going to be doing and putting it out there and having that conversation. The interpersonal equity and ownership. So one thing I have not mentioned is that when you form a business, right, you see an attorney, and you get a legal document, and you still need to do that. This part expands out a little bit more into what the interpersonal part is and what we each think our ownership is of the business, what we do if we're going to add shares or want to bring on other investors and things like that. So this gets more into that part of it. So are there any questions so far on these first three? So because each one of these, when I've worked with small businesses, will meet, everyone comes together, and then we'll meet separately with each partner. So if there's two partners, we'll work with each partner. If there's three, it usually takes about 3 hours per session. And you bring everybody back together. And the reason we do separate time with everybody is because there might be some things you're really uncomfortable talking about. And I'm always amazed at what people come up with and the challenges, because they've lived through this, they've had these experiences, and they have these worries. And it's a safe environment to be able to work through it. The fourth part is scenario planning. And this is where we use hypothetical situations. So if you think of like a hypothetical situation in your business you'd want to plan for. the what ifs. What if, usually this is taken care of in your legal document, but let's say what if one of the partners gets a divorce? Is the business protected? Or is that X now going to become another partner in the business? Maybe if they already were. Or what if one partner wants out, like the experience I had when I was a teenager? Is it written in there what will happen? Other scenarios could also be, what if what if employees don't come in, are short? What if we don't have employees working? Who's going to cover that? Have that agreement up front of who's going to do what in certain situations. So everyone is unique to every business, but this part of your planning can be a huge part, because then when it happens, you go, oh, wait a minute, we agreed, this is what we're going to do. You don't have to rethink it. You've already come up with an understanding. Or be influenced by stress, exactly. You can make it, you've done this when you've had time, you're in your logical brain, and you can come up with a plan. And because you're going through and you're being logical, if you need to make an adjustment to it, you can communicate that with each other at that time. And that could be another scenario. What if we need to make a plan and we can't communicate? Well, this is what we'll agree to do. We'll agree to stick with it. The fifth part is conflict management. So everybody has their own kind of conflict management style. I tend to either be an avoider of conflict, ironically. I don't like personal conflict. Or I tend to really want to be a collaborative person. I want to collaborate. And we're at the Cannabis Collaborative Conference, where we're bringing everybody together. But in order to bring everybody together, it takes a lot of coordination, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of talking to different people, listening to diverse opinions, diverse products, diverse presentations. And the main thing is it can take a lot of time. So if my style is to be collaborative, but my partner is more of a competer and says, no, this is how we're going to do it, I'm going to shut down and I'm just going to be like, done. I'm not going to talk about it because we can't do it now. I'll avoid it until we get to that point where we can come up with a good decision. So it's important to understand what your conflict management style is as well as that of your partner's. And there's the Thomas Kilmann instrument, which is one that will identify the 5 different kinds of conflict management styles. I've mentioned 3 of them. There's also avoider, collaborator, and competer. So do my way or the highway. And sometimes you need to have somebody who makes that decision. And that's probably maybe one of your hypothetical situations. What if we're in a crisis? Who's going to make that decision? I know in my family that when there's a crisis or someone's bleeding, go to my sister, not me. I don't like blood. So who's going to be better in that situation? But if maybe it's an issue with an employee who needs someone just to listen to them, bring them to me. I'll do that. So figure out what your strengths are. So anyway, back to the TKI. So the competer, avoider, and collaborator. There's also, though, compromising, which is kind of where you have a pie. You just kind of cut it up and divide out the pie. We've got 20 people in here. We'll just cut into 20 pieces. If you are collaborating, you're going to figure out other ways to expand that pie. And sometimes that's what we need to be able to do. And we might get kind of stuck in tunnel vision. And we need a collaborative process in order to help us come up with some other options. And then the accommodator. Everybody loves an accommodator, right? Because, yes, whatever you think, yes, yes. But then what happens? Nothing gets done, or they may come back and sabotage later because they never were able to never felt safe to have their voice. So you want to watch out for that. If you're surrounded by yes people, that's not necessarily a good thing. You want people to challenge you, and you've got to be ready to respond appropriately. And one of the ways you can do that is by being curious. So when you get hit with something, when you get that kind of that gut feeling, like, just breathe and say, my favorite line, I use it at home all the time. It drives my boyfriend crazy. I'll say, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more. But that is, learn more, because you might get a chance to learn from them. So tell your partner, or to an employee or a vendor or somebody. It buys yourself a little bit more time, shows you you're interested and you're listening. And it might help you come up with a better solution and avoid a conflict. And also help you explain why your position is also stronger too, because you've listened to theirs. So conflict management, there's also like the Myers-Briggs, and there's different tests you can take that are actually a really good idea if you are going into business with somebody else, is to figure out where you land on those. And it gives you something to talk about, gives you also tools of how to work with somebody who has that style, lets you know what you need, what components are you missing. So for example, if you know you're a creative and you need an analytical, it tells you who's going to be more compatible and how to work with that. So think about taking those extra steps to learn more about yourself as well as that of your partners. A lot of those things, those tests, you can, if you want the full complement of those, you can, there is some cost, but you can find versions online that are inexpensive, if not free. So look for those resources. And then number 6 is next steps. It's the follow-up. What I have found when people are hesitant to make a decision because they're not comfortable with it or they're not sure where they're at, is it's like, well, let's try this. And then maybe in a month, let's meet again and follow up and see how this is working for us. And with the interpersonal blueprint, what I like to do is follow up with folks usually around 3 months and check in with them. And so if we need to fine tune it, see how things are going, and just kind of follow up and check back in with them on that. So these are all things you can do with your partner and hopefully have those conversations. But if you're not in a place where you feel comfortable doing that, it's an investment of having someone come up and give you some structure. So somebody that you trust that can do that for you. You can certainly work with a mediator because in a mediator, I keep saying that term without explaining. Mediators are neutral. We're flexible. We are not tied to the outcome, so I don't know that you'd want to, for example, have another partner facilitate the communication because they are tied to the outcome. They are invested in the business, and as a mediator, we're there for the process, and we let our clients come out with the outcome that they want. So we can help you write up an agreement, but we don't tell you, well, this is what you should do. I worked with these folks before, this is what they did. It doesn't work that way, because then it becomes our agreement, not yours. So we are neutral, also confidential. I've shared some past experiences, but I'm not saying business names, I'm not saying names or anything like that. We're not going to talk about what we heard during our sessions with you, and if you've told us something one-on-one in private, we're not going to share it with the other party either. So trust is something that we work hard to build with in the process, and a place where hopefully you can feel like you can talk to somebody. We're very good listeners also, and sometimes you just need to vent, and maybe vent to a third party as opposed to your partner or to an employee or somebody else. Yes?
What would you say the difference is qualitatively, I guess, between going to a mediator versus going to a therapist?
So the question is, qualitatively, what is the difference between going to a mediator versus a therapist? There are mediators who came through the therapy route, and there are mediators who've come through the attorney route, and then there's people like me who just said, no, I'm just going to be a mediator. So therapists in theory, should be the same if they're acting as a mediator, but a therapist is more concerned about, well, what did your parents do? And they go back. A mediator takes what's in front of us today, gets a little bit of the backstory, but helps you problem solve and move forward. So what is the outcome? I tend to be very, what do you want to see happen? How are we going to change what's happening now to what it is you do want to see happening? So moving forward, that vision.
So like less about what happened to make y'all get here, but more about like how do we get forward?
Exactly. So less about the past, more about today and tomorrow. And also setting it up so you don't have this happen again. And if it does, you have a plan for how you're going to deal with it. Yeah, excellent question. And along those lines, if you do, when do you need help? Which would be a good time to get help? Well, one is if you're getting stuck or you can't seem to get the process started, you're feeling very unclear about what you're hearing or what you're saying or where you are in this process. Conflict keeps coming up, seems to keep emerging. And conflict coaching, through that process, we can work one-on-one. It's like, gosh, every time I say this, I just get this reaction, and I don't know what to do. So we can kind of role play, give feedback, and again, help you get to that outcome that you're seeking through a coaching process. If you're finding that you can't be honest with yourself or with others, or, with your partner, that might be a really good time. If you feel like you're like holding back, or you feel like what the other person's saying, it's like, that's just not true. Structure is, if we don't invest in something sometimes, we're not likely to follow through. And a mediator is there to give you a process and structure to something that can otherwise feel kind of like, it's not a machine that you're working through. It can feel a little loosey-goosey, right? But if you need some structure and commitment, that is when a good time to call in a mediator. And if a major issue emerges or you seem to keep seeing the same one over and over, again, you're going to keep getting stuck. And there's something going on. And you need be helpful to get some help to get through that so you can get on to what it is you want to be doing. So this process, now this is basically usually based on two to three partners, takes about 15 hours. And each one of those steps, so there were like 6 steps, each one of those, I think the first one's usually a couple of hours, but then steps 2 through 5 are about 3 hours long. And then with that follow-up, which can be created whenever whenever you agree, partners agree they want to do it. But it's about 15 hours long. And most of the work that I'm doing these days is online and through phone. So we can do in person as well, but sometimes it's just more convenient that way. And also, if we're doing things on through Zoom or those kind of mediums, you can be sometimes more comfortable. You can be in your own office, in your own space. So it usually takes about 15 hours. And as I mentioned, a conflict coach can kind of help get over if you're getting stuck or things keep coming up and you want to practice or you need just a little more help one-on-one with dealing with, if you're getting feedback, we hear about people who are bullies in work or kind of brusque with their style. Again, if you're getting feedback, a conflict coach can help you get through those sorts of things too. So if you're getting feedback that you're like, I don't know why I'm getting this feedback, or I need to have this conversation, I don't know how to do it. So that's how a conflict coach can help you through that process as well. And that could be another individual, not necessarily the mediator facilitating the process. All right. So some of the questions that I get about this process is that, we already established partnership. Is it too late? There were these artists, it's interesting, artists tend to get attracted to this, although I did have doctors too. There were these 2 artists who were doing this beautiful work, and they had grown so big that they needed to move out of their garage, out of one of the partners' garage. It was very loose when they were in the garage, but now they were bringing in some investors, and it was getting real. They were signing leases and doing all that. And they kept going at it. So it took a little while, but what underlying it, and maybe you guys will appreciate this, is that when they were working in the garage, it was very casual, and everybody pretty much smoked when they were working. Again, this was not cannabis industry. This was an artistic endeavor. And now that they were getting real and moving to this next phase, one partner was not comfortable with that anymore. And it was always underlying, and we never it took a couple of sessions to get past that, but he was not comfortable with that anymore. And the other partner didn't see any problem with it. He could go in the back, smoke with the employees, whatever. And they kept, because the model was changing. We're going from being in our garage into this much bigger commitment. And they had to work through that and have an understanding about how they would both, the expectation of how you would come to work, but also the relationship of the bosses with the work staff. Because that was another, it was like, it's casual. One was like the good cop, bad cop kind of thing. And they needed to be more united. In that business, they went through parts of, they didn't do the whole structured process. They just had more of an area they needed to work through before they felt like they could sign and commit to this next step. And they are an amazing business that's going on now. So they worked through it. I don't know what their business structure is now, but they continue to grow. It's pretty amazing. So you can do this process at any time. If you're thinking about forming a partnership, is it worth the investment? So both time and money. Is it worth it? Well, like those partners I just described, and that was going to be a huge step. They were going to sign like a 5-year lease. So the money that was going to be spent and the time to make sure this was a good idea was well worth probably not having sleepless nights. And if you have, if issues with, whoever's in that sphere that makes your business successful, if they keep emerging, can this blueprint help you? And yes, it can, because you can put in there those hypotheticals or those situations and have a plan for how you're going to deal with them in the plan. So if it's issues with vendors or employees, investors, you can have already a plan in there for how you're going to address when those issues come up. So when they do, you don't have to go, oh, you can just go, oh wait, we already know what we're going to do. This is how we're going to approach it. Or you've already agreed how you're going to communicate with each other. Frequently, what we'll find, people in small businesses are so busy, they just don't think, and they think they're always together, that they don't need to have weekly meetings or touch base in a formal way with their partner. Sometimes that's where those important decisions get made and that important communication is shared. So sometimes things like that can help resolve those issues that might keep coming up, because we've agreed in our partnership that we're going to have a weekly meeting and touch base. So are there other questions? And did I answer your question? Okay, great. Are there any other questions about this? Interpersonal business partnership blueprint. You guys all look a little beat up. What's going on? It's a lot to take on. I mean, small business is the backbone of this country. But it's also a huge risk and challenge. And because in this industry, we're really working with people. And darn it, people have their own ideas, don't they? They might not be the same as yours. And having a partnership, from what I have noticed from the small businesses I've worked with, really takes off a lot of the stress on each other and gives more balance. But a lot of front-end work has to go into it to get to that point. And that's why I think this blueprint is so helpful. Yeah, I think so the question is, do married couples so you see a lot of married couples in the cannabis industry forming a partnership and doing well. Yeah, no, I think that's a really good observation, and I don't have a scientific response to that, but my guess is that there's an investment that they have made, if they have, in each other and then with the business, and sometimes a business will keep a couple together just because they can't afford to not make it work. So there's an incentive to make it work as well. So I don't know the statistic to that, and that's, I'll have to look into that. But it could be disastrous for a married couple, but of course, this is like going to marriage counseling. I mean, who goes to marriage counseling thinking they're not going to get married? Right? But part of this is maybe you come together and think, maybe I shouldn't be in a partnership with this other person. But how hard is that? So good question. I'll have to look into that. So that's our time. Are there any other questions? I'm happy to stay and answer any more one-on-one. And again, the information is on the website, and I really thank you all for being here. So enjoy the conference.